He was the Commodore of Key West, the man from Margaritaville, and his legacy lives on in every nook and cranny of the southernmost city.
Down here, he found his niche. He found a home of his poetry and his lyrics that really catapulted him into the masses.
Today, we're looking for Jimmy Buffett's lost shaker of salt on this episode of Conked Out.
At the end of the road on US 1, in search of the sand, in search of the sun, the natives are restless, there isn't a doubt. It's the way we live, keyed up and conked out at the end of the road.
Key West, Jimmy Buffett. Jimmy Buffett, Key West. The nouns are practically interchangeable, even more than a half century after the singer first arrived here. You know, even though Jimmy claimed Key West as his home for only 7 years or so, you can still feel his presence. Maybe because he so eloquently captured the city's vibe in his lyrics. But to find out where it all began, one must turn the compass north, 150 miles, to the city of Coral Gables. The University of Miami's Mark Light Stadium. Right across the street from this intersection, you will find the building that brought Jimmy to South Florida in November of 1971. No, it had nothing to do with baseball. Jimmy was living in Nashville at the time. Winter was approaching. He was escaping the cold and a crumbling marriage. And he used an expired TWA credit card to book himself a flight to Miami because he had landed a gig at a coffee shop right on this block on the edge of the University of Miami's campus. It was called The Flick, right inside that bay window. The owner was a curmudgeon fella named Max Lawner. He barely acknowledged Jimmy when he showed up, and he said, "Buddy, you're not playing here tonight. You're not scheduled for another 2 weeks." Well, those were the most consequential 2 weeks in Jimmy Buffett's life. Buffett spent those 14 days in Coconut Grove at the home of fellow singer Jerry Jeff Walker, whose girlfriend used to live in the Florida Keys, and she's the one who suggested they break up the monotony with a weekend trip to Key West, and the rest is history. The Flick Coffee House emerged from the unrest of the 1960s. It was a place for beatnik poets and unknown comedians and upstart singers to cut their teeth. Joni Mitchell even performed here. Well, after his visit to Key West, Jimmy Buffett came back. He completed his obligation and then decided he was heading south again to the southernmost city. On that first visit to Key West, Buffett's first stop was at a nascent motel called the Pier House, which featured a bar tucked inside of a poolside suite and called the Chart Room. It would become Buffett's musical and social oasis. In the early 1970s, the Chart Room was practically a mini city hall as leaders from the city of Key West gathered here beginning at 5 p.m. in directors' chairs at wire spool tables that still exist today. You'd find the sheriff, the city manager, city attorney, the fire chief. It was once said that if a bomb went off in the Chart Room at happy hour, the city of Key West would grind to a halt. There wouldn't be anyone left to run the place. The Chart Room layout was a bit different back then. You can see the outline of a second door that used to be centered on the wall between the two windows, and the restrooms were right around the corner where the storage closets are today. Now, the geography is important because in 1972, during the last week of March, the University of South Carolina was on spring break, and a student named Jane Slagsvold made her way to Key West to visit a former roommate who tended bar at the Chart Room. Jimmy emerged from the side door on his way to the bathroom when he ran into that girl finishing a call on a payphone that was on that wall. And that's where Jimmy Buffett met the woman who would change his life and become his wife. Speaking of telephones, it was rumored that the sheriff and city attorney had direct lines installed behind the bar so their offices could get a hold of them in case there was an emergency. The Chart Room bar also inspired something called the Tequila Regatta, which was immortalized in the song Nautical Wheelers. Back in 1972, the sand practically came right up to the bar. If you were standing here, you'd have a clear view of the beach, where the bartending crew took part in a drinking game that wound up as a sailboat race in the hefty current of the Key West harbor. Suffice it to say, it didn't end well. A fitting footnote to this story is found not at the chart room, but at the Green Parrot Bar on Whitehead, home to a memorial to legendary watering holes of the past, including the original sign from the chart room.
You know, I can't walk these streets and not think about how different things are today than they were when Jimmy Buffett first arrived here in November of 1971. In fact, shortly after he arrived here permanently, the U.S. Navy closed down the naval base, not the air station, but the naval base, and hundreds of locals lost their jobs, including my dad. We almost had to leave the island. But the loss of those local paychecks and the loss of the military who shopped locally devastated the Key West economy. You could tell in these photographs, Wadell Street was practically boarded up. It was said that you could fire a cannon down the street and not hurt anybody. One of the places that survived it all was Ed Swift's Camera and Card Center, located across the street from the La Concha Hotel. Jimmy Buffett spent a lot of time here. Not only did Ed sell camera equipment, he sold stereo equipment, he sold music records, and he let Jimmy cash his performance checks, maybe 50, 100 bucks. This is what Ed Swift's Card Center looks like today, like any other tourist shop on Wadell Street, which is appropriate because Ed Swift was among the architects of tourism in Key West. He was among the ringleaders who ceded Key West from the Union to create the Conch Republic. He bought the Conch train and other attractions and built a national company called Historic Tours of America with operations from Arlington, Virginia, all the way down to Key West. One, 2, 3 Ann Street, Jimmy Buffett's first home in his new home of Key West, Florida. This would have been about 1972, and the author Tom McGuane was just finishing up his novel 92 in the Shade. He owned this place and he let Jimmy move in. Now McGuane many years later would marry one of Jimmy's sisters, so today they are brothers-in-law. But back in the day, boy, this was extraordinarily a convenient place for Jimmy Buffett to live. I mean, one half block that way was the Pier House where Jimmy hung out at the chart room, and then a half block the other way was the Salvation Army where Jimmy shopped for his clothes. Now apparently McGuane's brother really fancied the place as well. He wanted to move in, so he made up some stories about Jimmy throwing wild parties and got him tossed out.
Hey guys, I'm Ben, and this is Jimmy Buffett's house. So, since Jimmy lived here, this has been remodeled by the current owner, Captain's Corner, but it's a lot of it's still mostly the same. The bedroom's up there, and then Leslie from Captain's Corner's antique collection. But this was his first house in Key West.
Today, this is a dive shop complete with a pool. You could come here and get certified. So, from Jimmy Buffett's first home in Key West to the last home that Jimmy Buffett owned in Key West, or should we say homes, plural, because he owned two of them right next door to each other. The first one he moved into in 1986, and then a year later he bought the one next door. What's important about these homes is what's out back, because these are on the Riviera Canal, and that's what's significant about the location, because it's where in the early 1990s those Cuban migrants floated up Riviera Canal and landed randomly at Buffett's dock, inspiring the song Everybody's Got a Cousin in Miami. And on the other side of the canal is what's known in Key West as the Salt Ponds. And right behind these two Buffett homes is where some developers tried to build condos. Jimmy took them on. He staged a benefit concert to raise awareness and beat back the developers, convincing the state to buy the land. And today you could take a kayak down Riviera Canal right through the salt ponds that Jimmy Buffett saved. You know, in the early days, livestock was held one island up from Key West, which is why the water behind me is called Cow Key Channel, and why that island just across the bridge from Key West is called Stock Island. Well, somewhere between farm animals and the real estate boom, Stock Island was home to our one and only drive-in movie theater, the Islander, and that's where Jimmy Buffett in 1973 took a date to watch a movie called Payday. He ended up writing a song about that evening, not about the movie, about the date. It was called Grapefruit Juicy Fruit. The Islander Drive-In closed down in 1984, and Jimmy returned a few years later to film the music video to his song Take Another Road. Today, this valuable waterfront property has been turned into a residential development, appropriately called the Islander Village. Well, a few hundred yards north on US 1 was a restaurant called the Lantern Inn, and this also holds a special place in Jimmy Buffett history because in 1973, Jimmy's record label, ABC, sent a film crew to Key West to film a short that would be shown in ABC-owned movie theaters across the country. You've probably seen it. It's been seen more than 6 million times on YouTube, scenes of Jimmy around town, and culminating with him singing 2 songs, Come Monday and Nautical Wheelers. Well, those songs were recorded right here at the Lantern Inn, and Jimmy invited his friends to be the audience that day. Well, this building burned down in 1980, and the owners rebuilt it. Today it is a Mexican restaurant, which is ironic because Jimmy Buffett has had a history of Mexican restaurants. You might recall he began writing Margaritaville at a Mexican restaurant in Austin, Texas.
Coming up next, we'll dive into another street that defined Jimmy Buffett's Key West. Welcome back to Conked Out. Today we're standing in front of Fausto's Food Palace, where Jimmy Buffett famously cured a hangover with chocolate milk in his song, My Head Hurts, My Feet Stink.
The owner here, Jimmy Weekly, tells me that when the Parrot Heads are in town for their convention, he has to stock up on chocolate milk because it's part of a scavenger hunt. Well, as important as Fausto's is to the lure of Jimmy Buffett in Key West, there's another place that's even more important to the history and lore of the Coral Reefer Band, and it's right across the street from Fausto's Food Palace. In 1973, in his ABC bio, Jimmy said he had no intention of starting a band, maybe some instruments to help fill out the sound in concert, but that would be it. But by 1975, Jimmy had changed his mind. He had gathered together a group of talented musicians, and he brought them here to Key West to rehearse for the first time. And in this building behind me is where the Coral Reefers first got together as a band. Today it's called China Garden West, but back in the day it was an old-fashioned service station. It sold gas, it had service bays. By the 1970s, the gas station had closed down, and Jimmy's friend Tom Corcoran came to this location to open up a leather goods shop. He sold leather hats and leather purses, and he said, Jimmy, those bays are available. It's the perfect place for a band to rehearse. This building is on the corner of Fleming and Simonton Streets, and when the Coral Reefers were finally ready for their coming out party, they traveled to the other end of Simonton Street, the Atlantic side by the water, a place called Logan's Lobster House. And that's where the Coral Reefers, on March the 5th, 1975, performed in public for the first time. Man will do many things to get himself loved. He will do all things to get himself envied. Mark Twain's Wilson Maxims from his book, Following the Equator. No telling how many times Jimmy Buffett read this one. He was a Twain aficionado from his early days when his mother encouraged his appetite for reading, which led him to the library quite often, including this one, the Monroe County Public Library on Fleming Street.
There were 3 reasons. Number 1, air conditioning. Number 2, he needed a quiet place to conduct his business correspondence. He called it his first Key West office. And number 3, Jimmy just plain loved libraries, as evidenced by the song Love in the Library. You know, Mark Twain actually visited Key West in 1867, and he wrote about it in a book called Mark Twain's Travels with Mr. Brown. I'll tell you, he was not complimentary about Key West, calling it a decaying, windowless town, guiltless of commerce, agriculture, or manufacturers. I guess it's a good thing the TripAdvisor wasn't around back then. Well, the Monroe County Library was indeed Jimmy's oasis in his early Key West years, and he later wrote a letter to the library thanking the staff for the free use of that air conditioning.
Oh, the places literature will take you. So the next time you drive by a library, whether it's 701 Government Street in Mobile, which is Jimmy's hometown library, or right here at 701 Fleming Street in Key West, give a tip of the hat to the library and the influence that it had on Jimmy Buffett. The Key West Bite. Oh, what a sight. Mega yachts and glossy charter boats and the highest grossing restaurant in all of Monroe County, bringing in more than $1 million a month. My, how things have changed. When Jimmy Buffett landed here a half-century ago, this was a working waterfront where the shrimp boats tied up to the pilings, a gritty,
and sometimes dangerous place with bars like the Big Fleet, where shrimpers could blow off steam just like Jimmy described in the song A Woman Going Crazy on Caroline Street, which is the street that runs right alongside the Bight. Eventually, the shrimp boats moved out to Stock Island and the Bight began to evolve. Jimmy even returned here with his first Margaritaville store. It's a tourist shop today, right across from the Half Shell Raw Bar, where Jimmy could get his oysters and beer for dinner every day of the year. The Key West Bight was also home to Jimmy's recording studio. It used to be an ice house, but in 1988 it became Shrimp Boat Sound. And of all the greats who have come through these doors, perhaps the most interesting is the least known. His name is Mishka Frith, and when he was 4 years old, he was the inspiration for Jimmy's song Chanson pour les petits enfants. Well, Mishka grew up to be a pretty popular reggae artist, and he circled back into Jimmy's universe, signing with Mailboat Records, which brought him here to record. He decided to cover one of Jimmy's songs, Trying to Reason with the Hurricane Season. When I had him on my radio program, I asked him, of all the songs, how did he come up with that one?
You know, when you grow up listening to music, sometimes like these songs are more than songs. They're like little capsules of time and place and feeling that you remember from being very young. You know, before you had the kind of logical sense of the world, or like. It was just kind of like from a dream time, if I could put it in such terms, if you know what I mean. So those songs and a lot of other songs by lots of different artists have that kind of effect when I listen to them. Like, oh, it's like a time capsule, you know. And I was actually considering doing two songs. I was either going to do that or Son of a Sailor. And I was talking to my daughter, and I was like, which one do you think I should do? And I played her my version of both. You know, I played it on acoustic, like. And she was like, oh, no, do the Hurricane Season one. So
Squalls out on the Gulf Stream. Big storm is coming soon. I passed out in Miami. Gotta slip to it past noon.
Well, wherever you get your streaming music, do yourself a favor and look up Mishka Frith. You won't regret it. And if that wasn't enough, his sister is named Heather Nova. She sold more than 2 million albums, and she was also part of that group that welcomed Jimmy to St. Bart's back in the late 1970s. Corner of Alberta and Wadell, Jimmy Buffett knows every crack on these dirty sidewalks. He spent a lot of time in this neighborhood. That building behind me today is the front desk for the Coconut Beach Resort timeshare, but back in the day, it was home to a couple of apartments, and Jimmy Buffett called it home. But right around the corner was perhaps his most famous address, 704 Wadell, a little before and a little after. How many times do you think Jimmy Buffett stumbled up and down these stairs? His friend Chris Robinson, a bartender at the Chart Room, lived downstairs with his wife Sonia, who was mentioned in the song Nautical Wheelers. Chris Robinson still lives down here in the Keys. He's a flats fisherman, a guide. Now, Jimmy lived upstairs, and where that window is today was a door that led to stairs where Jimmy accessed his second floor apartment. And after you climb the stairs, this is what it looks like inside. The Coconut Beach Resort has taken Jimmy Buffett's living space and divided it up into 4 different timeshares, but you get the idea. You walk through the door out onto the deck, you can see the beach and the water. That's right where Jimmy Buffett wrote the song Trying to Reason with the Hurricane Season. And then later in the 70s and the early 80s, when Jimmy was spending more time in Colorado and St. Bart's, he let the gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson live in this space. This is a guy who tripped on LSD and wrote about it. Oh, the stories that took place here with Hunter S. Thompson. I used to have a friend who had a saying, if the walls could talk, I'm going to have to burn the sofa. You can't discuss Jimmy's Key West haunts without coming to this place, Captain Tony's. When he was running for mayor, the incumbent opponent was a man named Tom Sawyer. Everyone said it was a race between a fictional character and someone named after a fictional character. Yes, with the captain, it was hard to know where the truth ended and the fiction began.
Went down to the woods, get out of here. Heard a voice call out, son, come have a seat.
Coming up next on Conked Out, we'll head up to San Francisco for the Labor Day weekend show.
You know, when Jimmy Buffett was writing lyrics to his iconic first hit, Come Monday, he had just spent 4 lonely days in a brown LA haze and was headed up to San Francisco for the Labor Day weekend show. This is the backstory to that song, a song that allowed Jimmy, in his own words, to keep his phony baloney job for a little while longer. Buffett's Labor Day weekend show wasn't in San Francisco exactly, but a little north of the Golden Gate Bridge in a town called San Anselmo. The stage was a 200-seat venue called the Lion's Share. Today it's an optical office, but in the 1970s, legendary bands often called on the place. Janis Joplin practically lived here. For his Labor Day accommodations, there was no Ritz-Carlton for Jimmy Buffett, only a Howard Johnson's 8 miles south in a place called Mill Valley. Well, today this is a Holiday Inn Express, but years ago, appearing on the David Letterman Show, Buffett talked about his stay here when the roof was orange, and in the shadow of Mount Tamalpais, he polished off the lyrics of his heartfelt longing for his girlfriend Jane. His final show at the Lion's Share was on a Sunday. It gave him time to get over to Aspen to meet up with Jane. Monday had finally come. When he was growing up, Jimmy Buffett aspired to be a naval aviator. So here at the Key West Naval Air Station, he connected with a commanding officer who became a lifelong friend and then later the inspiration for a treasured song on Jimmy's last album, a song called Bubbles Up.
First met Jimmy in '85 when I took over command of Naval Air Station, Key West, Florida. Jimmy was talking and said, "Hey, you know, are you married?" And I said, "Sure am." He says, "You know how to cook?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm hungry." And I said, "Come on over and bring your guitars." I had done country music in Tennessee and around growing up, so music was my man. And we sat down to take a little song or two, and I picked up a harmonica, and he picked up his guitar, and we started playing Pencil Thin Mustache. And about halfway through, he quit. And I thought, crap. And he looked at my wife, Pat, and said, "This son of a bitch doesn't know how to play." And our relationship just sort of took from that. Later, he wanted to get out to a carrier and play for the guys. So that just happened that the USS America was coming off, the carrier was coming off some training in down south. And but to be able to fly with the Navy, and particularly over water, he had to have some special training. And within that special training, ended up a water survival. I was told that if I wanted to fly an F-14, I'd better get my ass back in the water. I was dragged around in a parachute, launched from an ejection seat, spun on a G machine until every ounce of blood left in my brain. And we go in and he takes a Dilbert Dunker, which is the old thing that you're in a cockpit, you're into the water, blindfolded, upside down, in the dark. And Jimmy was saying, "Oh crap, you know, doing what?" I said, "Yeah, everybody else is doing it, you're going to do too." So he was there ready to go. But he said, "Well, how do you know which way's up?" And I said, "Jimmy, you can either fart or you can let out a little air from your lungs and then follow the bubbles. And they'll always take you back to where you started." As I was strapped in from a ride down the rail, Red banged on my helmet, looked me straight in the eyes and shouted, "Remember, rock star, bubbles up." Jimmy was getting out of the water. He had hair then, and it was curlied up a little bit, and one of the enlisted men that was running part of the swim program said, "Hey, Captain," I was a captain, said, "Captain, look at him. Looks like he's got a damn Brillo pad squeezed over the top of his head." And at that point, his nickname for the Navy became Brillo. And for the next 20, 30 years, Jimmy and I referred to each other as Brillo and Redman. And we always ended it with bubbles up and fins up forever. we got along so well as far as the music went. He'd just holler and say, "Bring your harp, come on." I was the flag officer at Miramar with the fighters. He came in to fly with us, and at the same time, to pay back, we did a show just at the Officers Club for all of the air crew and everybody there for appreciative. You know, it's about an hour and a half, but still, it was a good thing. He was always giving. We have a nice little church out here that we go to. It's traditional, country. I play harmonica there every once in a while from them. That's the North Point Baptist Church, Murray Island, Florida. He was like a brother to me. I was sort of his senior brother, and we shared a lot of things together over the years. And can bring a tear to your eye when you lose a close friend like that. So Bubba's up, Bubba. I love you, man.
That'll do it for this edition of Conked Out. For more information, visit BuffettBackstories.com.